I was standing in the center of the most exclusive ballroom in Manhattan, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and men in tuxedos worth more than my annual salary, when I realized that speaking the truth was about to cost me everything I'd worked for. The security guards were already moving toward me, their earpieces crackling with instructions, and Marcus Whitmore, one of the wealthiest men in America, was staring at me with the kind of cold fury that comes from never being challenged. But I couldn't take back what I'd said. I wouldn't, because for the first time in my 34 years, I'd stopped pretending to be someone I wasn't, and the man I'd been protecting, the man I'd fallen for in the most unexpected way, was watching me from across the room with an expression I couldn't read. This is the story of how I lost my job, my reputation, and nearly my freedom, all because I finally found the courage to defend something that mattered more than any of those things. It's the story of how a single moment at an international gala changed everything I thought I knew about myself, about power, about what it means to stand up when the entire world wants you to sit down and be quiet. 6 months before that night, I was living the life everyone told me I should want. I was 34 years old, working as a senior communications strategist at Whitmore Global Enterprises in New York City. My apartment in Brooklyn was small, but mine. My girlfriend Sarah and I had been together for 3 years, and while we didn't talk about marriage explicitly, it hovered in the background of our conversations like an inevitability. I'd grown up in Ohio, the son of a high school teacher and a nurse, and I'd worked hard to get where I was. My job was demanding but rewarding. I crafted messages for one of the most powerful corporations in the world, helping shape how Marcus Whitmore and his empire were perceived by the public. I was good at it. I understood how to make things sound better than they were, how to spin a narrative, how to protect reputations. I'd convinced myself that this was what success looked like. I'd convinced myself I was happy. I'd convinced myself of a lot of things. My relationship with Sarah was comfortable. We had routines: Sunday mornings at the farmer's market, Thursday nights trying new restaurants in the city, weekends visiting her parents in Connecticut. She was beautiful and smart and ambitious, working her way up at a law firm downtown. Everyone liked us together. We looked good on paper, but there was something missing, something I couldn't name. I told myself it was just the stress of work, the long hours, the exhaustion that comes from always being on call for a billionaire who never slept. I told myself that all relationships eventually settle into something less exciting, something more practical. I told myself that the restlessness I felt late at night, staring at the ceiling while Sarah slept beside me, was normal. I told myself a lot of things. Then Daniel Cortez walked into the Whitmore Global offices on a rainy Tuesday morning in April, and everything I'd been telling myself started to crack. He was the new chief operating officer, brought in from Whitmore's London office to oversee the company's expansion into European markets. I'd heard about him before he arrived. Everyone had. Daniel Cortez was a legend in corporate circles, the man who'd turned around 3 failing divisions and made them profitable within 18 months. He was 41 years old, 7 years older than me, and he had the kind of reputation that made junior executives nervous and senior executives jealous. Marcus Whitmore himself had recruited him, which meant he was untouchable. When he walked into the morning briefing that first day, I understood immediately why people talked about him the way they did. He wasn't tall, maybe 5 feet 10 inches, but he carried himself like someone who'd learned early that presence matters more than height. He had dark hair starting to gray at the temples, olive skin that suggested Mediterranean ancestry, and brown eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He wore a navy suit that fit him perfectly, and when he shook my hand, his grip was firm but not aggressive, professional, confident. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow that made him look less polished, more human. I noticed the scar. I noticed the way his voice was calm and measured when he spoke. I noticed that he listened more than he talked, which was rare in our world of big egos and bigger mouths. I noticed all of this, and I told myself it was because I was good at reading people, at understanding who had real power and who was just performing it. I told myself it was professional interest, nothing more. Over the next few weeks, I worked closely with Daniel on the communication strategy for the European expansion. We had meetings, conference calls, late nights in the office going over press releases and talking points. He was different from the other executives I'd worked with. He didn't talk down to me. He asked questions and actually waited for answers. He had a dry sense of humor that caught me off guard. Little comments that made me laugh when I wasn't expecting to. He was demanding but fair, pushing for better work without being cruel about it. And he was brilliant. I watched him navigate complex negotiations, diffuse tense situations, find solutions that seemed impossible. I found myself looking forward to our meetings. I found myself staying late even when I didn't need to, hoping he might stop by my office to discuss something. I found myself thinking about him at odd moments during the day, wondering what he thought about a particular issue, imagining what he might say about something I'd read or seen. I told myself it was admiration. I told myself I was learning from someone at the top of his field. I told myself it was mentorship, the kind of professional relationship that helps you grow in your career. But then there were the small moments that didn't fit into that neat explanation. The way my pulse quickened when I saw his name on my calendar. The way I became hyper-aware of the space between us when we stood at the same table looking at documents. The way I noticed details about him that had nothing to do with work, like the fact that he drank his coffee black, that he had a habit of running his hand through his hair when he was thinking hard about something, that he wore a simple watch that looked expensive but understated, that his hands were strong and capable, marked with small scars that suggested he'd worked with them before he'd worked with his mind. I noticed that he was left-handed. I noticed that he sometimes loosened his tie at the end of long days, and the gesture seemed intimate somehow, like I was seeing something private. I noticed that when he smiled, really smiled, it changed his entire face, made him look younger and less guarded. I noticed all of these things, and I didn't know what to do with the noticing. Sarah noticed that something was different. She asked me one night over dinner if everything was okay at work, if I was happy, if there was something bothering me. I told her I was fine, just busy with the European expansion project. She looked at me for a long moment, and I wondered if she could see what I couldn't yet admit to myself. But she didn't push. She never pushed. Maybe that was part of the problem. We went back to our routines, our comfortable patterns, and I tried not to think about why I felt more alive during a 15-minute conversation with Daniel about market strategy than I did during entire weekends with the woman I was supposed to love. The first time I really understood that something was happening, something I couldn't explain away, was during a business trip to Boston in late May. Daniel and I flew up together for meetings with potential partners. We sat next to each other on the plane, and he told me about growing up in Miami, the son of Cuban immigrants who'd worked brutal hours to give him opportunities they'd never had. He talked about his father, who'd been a carpenter, and how he'd learned to appreciate craftsmanship, the idea of building something solid that would last. He was more open than I'd ever seen him, and I found myself telling him things I rarely shared, about growing up in the Midwest, about feeling like I never quite fit in, about the pressure to live up to expectations I hadn't set for myself. When the plane hit turbulence and I gripped the armrest, he glanced at me and said quietly, "It's okay. Just air pockets. Nothing to worry about." His voice was steady, reassuring, and I realized I trusted him completely. I realized I felt safer sitting next to him than I'd felt in a long time. I realized that I wanted the flight to last longer, wanted to keep talking to him, wanted to exist in this small space where the rest of the world couldn't reach us. That night, after our meetings, we had dinner at a restaurant near the harbor. It was supposed to be a working dinner, reviewing how things had gone, planning next steps. But somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, the conversation shifted. We talked about books, about music, about places we'd traveled and places we wanted to go. He told me about a year he'd spent in Barcelona, learning Spanish and working odd jobs, trying to figure out who he was outside of his family's expectations. I told him about a summer I'd spent after college, backpacking through Southeast Asia, feeling lost and found at the same time. We talked about loneliness, about the strange isolation that comes from success, about how you can be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. I watched his face in the candlelight, the way shadows moved across his features, and I felt something shift inside me, something fundamental and terrifying. I wanted to reach across the table and touch his hand. I wanted to know what his skin felt like, what it would be like to be close to him without the barrier of professionalism between us. I wanted things I'd never let myself want before, and the realization made my chest tight. When we got back to the hotel, we stood in the hallway between our rooms, and there was a moment, just a few seconds, where neither of us moved. He looked at me, and I looked at him, and something unspoken passed between us. I could feel my heart beating hard against my ribs. I could feel the air change, become charged with possibility. Then he said goodnight, his voice slightly rough, and went into his room. I stood there for a long time after his door closed, trying to steady my breathing, trying to understand what had just happened, trying to understand what I'd wanted to happen. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time I let myself think the thoughts I'd been avoiding. I thought about the way I felt when I was near Daniel, the way my body responded to his presence, the way I found excuses to be around him. I thought about my relationship with Sarah, about how I'd never felt this kind of pull toward her, this kind of desperate wanting. I thought about my past relationships with women, and I realized with growing horror that I'd been going through the motions, performing what I thought I was supposed to feel. I thought about moments throughout my life that suddenly made sense in a new and frightening way. The way I'd always been more interested in male friendships than seemed normal. The way I'd noticed other men, their bodies, their faces, and told myself it was just comparison or competition. The way I'd felt different, separate, like I was watching life through glass instead of living it directly. I thought about all of this, and I felt like I was falling apart and coming together at the same time. When I got back to New York, I couldn't look at Sarah the same way. She asked me how the trip went, and I told her it was productive, successful. I heard myself lying, heard the distance in my own voice. That weekend, we went to her parents' house in Connecticut, like we always did, and I sat at their dining table eating pot roast and making conversation, and I felt like a fraud. I felt like I was playing a role in someone else's life. Her mother asked when we were going to make things official, and Sarah laughed and changed the subject, but I saw the hope in her eyes, the expectation. I excused myself and stood in their bathroom, gripping the sink, looking at my reflection, and barely recognizing the person staring back at me. I was 34 years old, and I didn't know who I was. I was 34 years old, and I'd built my entire life on a foundation of assumptions that were crumbling beneath me. The next few weeks were torture. I tried to avoid Daniel, to put distance between us, but we worked too closely together. Every meeting was agony. Every casual conversation felt loaded with meaning. I caught him watching me sometimes, and I wondered if he could see what was happening to me, if he knew. I wondered if he felt it too, this thing between us that I couldn't name. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake next to Sarah, feeling her warmth beside me, and feel nothing but guilt and confusion. I'd think about Daniel, about the sound of his voice, about the way he'd looked at me in that hotel hallway, and I'd feel everything. Too much, overwhelming. I started pulling away from Sarah without meaning to. She noticed. Of course she noticed. She asked me repeatedly what was wrong, if I was unhappy, if there was someone else. I told her no, I was just stressed about work. Another lie. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, someone who lied to the people he cared about, someone who couldn't face the truth, even when it was destroying him. Then came the night that changed everything. It was mid-June, and Whitmore Global was hosting a charity gala at the Plaza Hotel. It was one of those massive events that the company threw twice a year, ostensibly to raise money for various causes, but really to show off Marcus Whitmore's wealth and connections. There would be politicians, celebrities, business leaders from around the world. The communications team had been working on it for months, and as senior strategist, I was responsible for making sure everything ran smoothly from a PR perspective. I'd been to these events before. They were always the same, excessive, performative, exhausting. But this one was different because Daniel would be there, and because Sarah would be there as my date, and because I knew I couldn't keep pretending much longer. Sarah looked beautiful that night. She wore a long black dress that showed off her shoulders, and her hair was swept up in a way that made her look elegant and sophisticated. She was excited about the event, about seeing this world I worked in, about meeting the people I talked about. I should have felt proud to have her on my arm. I should have felt lucky. Instead, I felt like I was suffocating. We arrived at the plaza, and the ballroom was everything you'd expect. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, tables draped in white linen, flowers that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. A string quartet played near the entrance. Waiters in white jackets circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The room was full of people in expensive clothes making expensive conversation. Marcus Whitmore held court near the center, surrounded by admirers and sycophants. He was in his early 60s, tall and silver-haired, with the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. He'd built his empire through a combination of brilliance, ruthlessness, and an absolute certainty in his own rightness. I'd always admired him from a distance, respected his business acumen, even when I disagreed with his methods. But I'd also always been slightly afraid of him, of his power, of what he could do to people who crossed him. I was introducing Sarah to some colleagues when I saw Daniel across the room. He was talking to a group of European investors, and he looked different in a tuxedo, more formal, but somehow more himself. Our eyes met for a second, and I felt that familiar jolt, that electricity that I'd been trying to ignore. Sarah said something to me, and I had to ask her to repeat it because I hadn't heard. She followed my gaze, saw Daniel, and something flickered across her face. Understanding, maybe, or suspicion. She asked if that was the new COO I'd been working with so closely. I said yes, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. She studied me for a moment, then suggested we get some champagne. I followed her to the bar, grateful for the distraction, hating myself for being grateful. The evening progressed in the usual way. Speeches, presentations, the announcement of donation totals that were meant to impress. I did my job, made sure journalists had the right information, handled a small crisis when a minor celebrity got too drunk too early. Sarah stayed close to me, but there was a new tension between us, an awareness that something was wrong even if neither of us wanted to name it. I kept track of where Daniel was in the room without meaning to. Some part of my brain always calibrated to his location. I saw him talking to Marcus Whitmore, saw them laugh about something, saw the easy camaraderie between them. I wondered what they were discussing. I wondered if Daniel ever thought about me the way I thought about him. I wondered if I was losing my mind. Around 10 o'clock I was standing near the bar when I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. 3 men in tuxedos, all executives from different companies, were talking loudly enough that I could hear them even over the music and crowd noise. They were discussing a recent merger, some business deal that had fallen through, and one of them, a red-faced man with a booming voice, said something about how the CEO of the other company was too weak, probably a faggot who couldn't make hard decisions. The other men laughed. They actually laughed. I froze. I felt like I'd been slapped. The word hung in the air, ugly and violent, and no one around them seemed to care. This was the world I worked in, the world I'd been trying to fit into my entire adult life. These were the men who controlled billions of dollars, who shaped policy, who decided the futures of thousands of employees. And they stood in a ballroom at a charity event, wearing tuxedos that cost thousands of dollars. And they used that word like it was nothing. Like people like me, people I was just beginning to understand I might be, were nothing. I should have walked away. I should have let it go, done what I'd always done, which was keep my head down and my mouth shut. But something in me snapped. Maybe it was weeks of lying to myself and everyone around me. Maybe it was the exhaustion of pretending. Maybe it was seeing Sarah across the room, knowing I was hurting her by being someone I wasn't. Maybe it was thinking about Daniel, about the possibility of something real and honest and terrifying. Whatever it was, I couldn't stay silent. I walked over to the 3 men, and I said, loudly enough that people nearby turned to look, "That's an incredibly offensive thing to say. You should be ashamed of yourselves." The red-faced man looked at me like I was an insect that had dared to land on his sleeve. He asked who the hell I was. I told him my name, told him I worked for Whitmore Global. He laughed, a mean sound, and said I should learn to mind my own business and not be so sensitive. He said it was just a joke, that people were too politically correct these days. I felt my hands shaking, felt adrenaline flooding my system, and I said, "It's not a joke, it's bigotry, and using that word, especially in a professional setting, says more about your character than anything else." The conversation around us had stopped. People were staring. I could feel the weight of their attention, could sense the social calculation happening in real time. I'd broken an unspoken rule. I'd made a scene. I'd challenged someone publicly, and in this world, that was unforgivable. The red-faced man's expression turned ugly. He stepped closer to me, invading my space, and said that maybe I was one of those people. Maybe that's why I was so upset. Maybe I should go back to whatever rock I'd crawled out from under. I heard someone gasp. I heard the music still playing, incongruous and cheerful. And then I heard another voice, calm and clear, cutting through the tension. "That's enough." Daniel had appeared beside me. I hadn't seen him approach, but suddenly he was there, solid and real, standing between me and the red-faced man. He said, "I think you owe this man an apology, and then I think you should leave." The red-faced man sputtered, said Daniel had no right to tell him what to do, that he was a guest of Marcus Whitmore himself. Daniel said quietly, "I'm the chief operating officer of this company, and I'm telling you that your behavior is unacceptable. You can leave voluntarily, or I can have security escort you out. Your choice." For a moment, I thought the man might actually take a swing at Daniel, but something in Daniel's expression, some absolute certainty, made him back down. He muttered something about political correctness ruining everything, shot me a look of pure hatred, and stalked off with his companions. The crowd that had gathered started to disperse, conversations resuming, people pretending nothing had happened. But I knew better. I knew that word would spread, that I'd just made myself a target, that there would be consequences. Daniel turned to me, and his eyes were concerned, searching my face. He asked if I was okay. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He touched my arm briefly, just a second, but I felt it like an electric shock. He said, "That took courage. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Then he walked away, back into the crowd, leaving me standing there trying to process what had just happened. Sarah found me a few minutes later. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. She asked what I'd been thinking, making a scene like that, confronting those men. I tried to explain, tried to tell her that I couldn't just stand there and let them say those things, but the words came out wrong. She looked at me for a long time, and I saw something in her eyes that might have been recognition or resignation, or both. She said quietly, "You're not happy. You haven't been happy for a long time." I've been pretending not to notice, but I can't anymore. I wanted to deny it, wanted to reassure her, but I couldn't. I couldn't lie to her anymore. She said, "I think I know why. I think maybe you know why too, even if you won't say it." My throat was tight. I felt tears burning behind my eyes. She touched my face gently, sadly, and said, "I love you, but I can't compete with something you won't even admit to yourself." Then she left. She walked out of the ballroom, out of the plaza, out of my life, and I let her go because I knew she was right. I knew I'd been unfair to her, keeping her tied to someone who could never love her the way she deserved. I should have left then. I should have gone home, processed what had happened, tried to figure out what came next, but I was numb, operating on autopilot, and I had a job to do. I went back to work, checking in with the PR team, making sure the event was still running smoothly despite the drama. I avoided looking at anyone directly, afraid of what I might see in their faces. Judgment, disgust, pity. An hour later, I was approached by Marcus Whitmore's personal assistant, a severe woman in her 50s who'd been with him for decades. She told me that Mr. Whitmore wanted to see me immediately in one of the private rooms off the ballroom. My stomach dropped. I knew this wasn't going to be good. I followed her through the crowd, aware of people watching, whispering. We entered a small conference room where Marcus Whitmore stood by the window, looking out at the New York skyline. He didn't turn around when I entered. He said, "Close the door." I did. The silence stretched out, oppressive and threatening. Finally, he turned to face me, and his expression was cold, controlled fury. He said, "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you have any concept of how much damage you've caused?" I tried to explain, tried to tell him what those men had said, why I'd felt compelled to speak up. He cut me off. He said the man I'd confronted was the CEO of a major investment firm, a personal friend of his, someone whose company did billions of dollars of business with Whitmore Global. He said I'd embarrassed a valued partner, created a scandal, made the company look bad. He said I'd let my personal feelings interfere with my professional judgment, and that was unacceptable. I felt anger rising in me, pushing through the fear. I said, "He used a slur. He was openly bigoted. I was just calling him out on it." Marcus Whitmore's eyes narrowed. He said, What you were doing was grandstanding. You were making yourself feel important by creating drama, and in the process, you've put a major business relationship at risk. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I said, "So you're saying I should have just let him use that word? Just stood there and said nothing?" He said, "I'm saying you should have been smart enough to recognize that this isn't the time or place for political statements. This is business. This is about relationships and deals and money. Your job is to make this company look good, not to wage personal crusades." I felt something break inside me. I'd spent years working for this man, crafting his image, protecting his reputation, making him look like something more than he was. And now, I could see him clearly for the first time. He didn't care about right or wrong. He didn't care about dignity or respect. He cared about money and power, and anyone who threatened those things was expendable. I said, my voice shaking, "If standing up to bigotry is a political statement, then I guess I'm political. And if that's a problem for you, then maybe I shouldn't work here anymore." His expression changed, became calculating. He said, "Be very careful about what you say next. Your career, your reputation, everything you've built, it can all disappear very quickly. I have that power. One phone call, and you'll never work in corporate communications again. Is this really the hill you want to die on?" I should have backed down. I should have apologized, begged for my job, done whatever it took to survive. But I was so tired of pretending, so tired of bending myself into shapes that didn't fit, so tired of being afraid. I said, "Yes, this is exactly the hill I want to die on. Because if I can't speak up when someone uses hate speech, if I can't defend basic human dignity, then what's the point of any of this? What's the point of success if it means being silent in the face of cruelty?" Marcus Whitmore's face flushed red. He said, "You're fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. And if you say one word about this to anyone, if you try to make this into some kind of public relations nightmare for me, I will destroy you. I will make sure you never work again. I will make sure everyone knows that you were fired for cause, for unprofessional behavior, for creating a hostile work environment. Do you understand me?" I understood him perfectly. I understood that he was exactly the kind of man who would use his power to crush anyone who challenged him. I understood that he would rewrite the narrative, make himself the victim, make me the villain. I understood that I was about to lose everything. And I also understood that I didn't care anymore. I said, "Do what you have to do. I'm done being afraid of men like you." His eyes widened slightly, surprised by my defiance. Then he pressed a button on his phone and said, "Send security to conference room B. We have a situation." Within minutes, 2 large men in dark suits appeared. Marcus Whitmore told them I was being terminated and needed to be removed from the premises immediately. They looked uncomfortable, but professional. One of them said, "Sir, we need you to come with us." I nodded. I looked at Marcus Whitmore one last time and said, "History won't remember you kindly. You know that, right? All the money, all the power, it won't matter. You'll just be another rich man who chose profit over principle." His jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. I turned and walked out of the room with the security guards flanking me. They escorted me back through the ballroom, and this time everyone definitely noticed. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People stared openly. I saw shock on some faces, satisfaction on others, confusion on most. I saw Daniel standing near the bar, and our eyes met across the crowded room. His expression was anguished, like he wanted to do something, but didn't know what. I gave him a small nod, trying to tell him it was okay, that I'd made my choice. Then I saw something that made my chest tighten. He started walking toward me, pushing through the crowd, and I realized he was going to make a scene, was going to defend me publicly, was going to risk his own position. I shook my head at him, a clear signal to stop, to let it go. He hesitated, conflict written all over his face. One of the security guards said quietly, "Sir, we need to keep moving." I let them guide me toward the exit, and I didn't look back. They took me to a small office where they had me surrender my company ID and sign some paperwork. The whole process was humiliating and efficient. They gave me a box for my personal belongings from my office, which they'd have delivered to my apartment within 48 hours. They made me sign a non-disclosure agreement that basically said I couldn't talk about anything related to my employment or termination. I signed it. What choice did I have? Then they walked me out through a service entrance, away from the Gala, away from the glamour, out into the humid New York night. I stood on the sidewalk in my tuxedo, holding my phone and wallet, and I started laughing. It was a slightly hysterical sound, but I couldn't help it. I'd just lost my job, probably my career, definitely my relationship, all in the span of a few hours. I'd burned my life down over a principle, over the right to call out hatred when I heard it. And the strangest thing was, I felt lighter than I had in months. I felt like I could breathe. I walked for a long time that night, through the streets of Manhattan, not ready to go home to my empty apartment. I thought about everything that had happened, about the choices I'd made, about the person I'd been and the person I was becoming. I thought about Sarah, and I felt guilty and sad, but also relieved. She deserved someone who could love her completely, without reservation, and I'd finally admitted to both of us that I wasn't that person. I thought about my job, about the career I'd built, and I realized I'd been good at it because I was good at pretending, good at crafting narratives that hid uncomfortable truths. But I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't want to spend my life protecting powerful men who used their power to hurt people. I thought about the red-faced executive and his casual cruelty, about Marcus Whitmore and his threats, about all the times I'd stayed silent when I should have spoken up. I thought about Daniel, about the way he'd defended me, about the look on his face when security was escorting me out. I thought about the feelings I'd been trying to deny, about what they meant, about who I really was underneath all the layers of pretending. Around 3 in the morning, I finally went home to my apartment in Brooklyn. It felt different, emptier, like Sarah's absence had changed the space, even though she'd only officially left a few hours ago. I sat on my couch in my tuxedo, still too wired to sleep, and I let myself cry for the first time. I cried for the relationship I'd ended, for the pain I'd caused Sarah, for the years I'd wasted trying to be someone I wasn't. I cried for the job I'd lost and the uncertainty ahead. But mostly I cried from relief, from the overwhelming sense of finally being honest about something fundamental. I was 34 years old, and I was attracted to men. Maybe I'd always been attracted to men. Maybe all those relationships with women had been me trying to fit into a story that wasn't mine. Maybe I was gay, or bisexual, or something else entirely. I didn't have the language for it yet, didn't have it all figured out. But I knew I couldn't keep lying. I knew I couldn't keep building my life on a foundation of denial. The next few days were brutal. The story of my confrontation and firing spread through corporate New York like wildfire. I got calls from former colleagues, some supportive, most just curious about the gossip. I got emails from recruiters telling me they couldn't help me, that I'd been blacklisted. I got a call from my mother in Ohio, who'd somehow heard about it, asking what had happened, if I was okay. I tried to explain, but how do you tell your parents that you just blew up your life because you're figuring out you might be gay and you couldn't stand by while someone used a slur? I told her a simplified version, that I'd stood up for what was right and paid the price. She was quiet for a long time, then said, "I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Whatever you're going through, we love you." I cried after that call, grateful for her unconditional support even when she didn't understand everything. A week after the gala, Daniel showed up at my apartment. I wasn't expecting him. I'd been avoiding everyone, living on savings, trying to figure out what came next. When I opened the door and saw him standing there in jeans and a t-shirt, looking tired and worried, my heart did something complicated in my chest. He asked if he could come in. I let him in, suddenly self-conscious about the state of my apartment, about my own appearance. I hadn't been taking care of myself, hadn't been sleeping well. He looked around, then looked at me and said, "I'm sorry. I should have done more that night. I should have stood with you more publicly." I shook my head. I told him he'd done enough, that he'd defended me when it mattered, that I didn't want him to risk his position. He said, "I don't care about my position. I care about you." The words hung in the air between us. I felt my breath catch. He continued, "I've been thinking about you constantly since that night. Hell, I've been thinking about you constantly since Boston. And I know this is complicated. I know you just ended a relationship. I know you're dealing with a lot. But I need you to know that I see you. I see who you are. And I think you're incredibly brave." I didn't know what to say. I stood there, looking at this man who'd somehow become so important to me. and I felt terrified and hopeful and completely overwhelmed. I said, "I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know who I am. I'm 34 years old and I'm just figuring out that I might be gay or bi or something, and it's terrifying. I've spent my whole life trying to be what everyone expected, and I don't know how to be anything else." Daniel stepped closer. He said gently, "You don't have to have it all figured out right now. You don't have to have labels or explanations. You just have to be honest about what you feel. Can you do that?" I looked at him, at his kind eyes and his patient expression, and I felt something inside me let go, some last piece of resistance crumbling. I said, "I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to meet you. I feel like everything before this was just practice, just going through the motions. When I'm around you, I feel more myself than I've ever felt. And that terrifies me because I don't know what it means. I don't know how to be this person." He reached out and took my hand, and the touch was electric, overwhelming. He said, "It means you're finally letting yourself feel something real. It means you're finally being honest. That's all it has to mean right now." I looked down at our hands, at the way his fingers wrapped around mine, and I felt tears on my face. I said, "I lost everything. My job, my relationship, probably my career. I don't know what happens next." He said, "You didn't lose everything. You found yourself. That's worth more than any job or career." Then he did something I wasn't expecting. He pulled me into a hug, and I let myself sink into it, let myself feel the warmth and solidity of him, let myself acknowledge how much I'd wanted this, how much I'd been denying. We stood there for a long time, just holding each other, and it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. When we finally pulled apart, I asked him what happened at Whitmore Global after I left. He told me that Marcus Whitmore had tried to spin the story, had told people I'd been fired for unprofessional conduct, for creating a scene and harassing a guest. But Daniel had pushed back. He'd gone to the board of directors and told them the truth about what had happened, about the slur, about my courage in calling it out, about Marcus's vindictive response. He'd threatened to resign if they didn't address the situation properly. The board had been in crisis mode for days, trying to figure out how to handle it. Marcus Whitmore was furious, but Daniel had leverage, and he'd used it. He told me, "I made them understand that protecting bigotry and punishing people who speak up against it isn't just morally wrong, it's bad business. In this climate, with social media and public accountability, they can't afford to be on the wrong side of this." I asked what that meant for me. He said, "It means they want to offer you a settlement, a significant one, and a neutral reference. It's not justice, but it's something." I didn't care about the money or the reference. I cared that Daniel had risked his position for me, had stood up when it would have been easier to stay silent. I told him that, and he smiled, that real smile that changed his whole face. He said, "I told you, I care about you, and I'm tired of pretending I don't." I asked him what he meant. He said, "I'm 41 years old. I came out when I was 25, lost most of my family because of it, built my career in a world that's not always welcoming to people like us. I've learned to be careful, to keep my personal life private, to not make waves. But watching you that night, seeing you refuse to stay silent even when it cost you everything, it reminded me why I came out in the first place. It reminded me that authenticity matters more than safety. And it made me realize that I've been waiting for someone like you, someone brave enough to be themselves even when it's hard." I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. Daniel was gay. Daniel had been out for years. Daniel understood what I was going through because he'd been through it himself. And Daniel cared about me, not just as a colleague or a friend, but as something more. I said, "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be with a man. I don't even know if I'm ready." He said, "Then we'll figure it out together. No pressure, no expectations, just honesty and time." He stayed that night, and we talked until dawn. We talked about his coming out story, about the family members who'd rejected him and the friends who'd stood by him. We talked about my confusion, my fears, my slowly growing understanding of myself. We talked about what it meant to live authentically in a world that often punishes authenticity. And somewhere in those early morning hours, sitting on my couch with coffee going cold on the table, I kissed him. It was tentative and awkward and perfect, and it felt like the first honest thing I'd done in years. The months that followed were not easy. Coming out, even to myself, was a process full of setbacks and revelations. I told my parents, and while they struggled with it at first, they ultimately chose love over discomfort. I lost some friends who couldn't reconcile their image of me with this new reality. I gained others who appreciated my honesty. I started therapy, working through years of denial and internalized shame. I looked for new work and found that while some doors had closed, others had opened. I ended up doing freelance communications work for non-profits, using my skills to help organizations that actually aligned with my values. The money wasn't as good, but the work felt meaningful in a way corporate PR never had. Daniel and I took things slowly. We went on dates, real dates, learning each other outside the context of work. We had conversations about what we wanted, about our fears and hopes. We navigated the complications of him still working at Whitmore Global while I'd been fired from there. Eventually, he made his own decision to leave, taking a position at a smaller company that was more aligned with his values. We moved in together after about 6 months, and I learned what it felt like to be in a relationship where I didn't have to pretend, where I could be fully myself. It wasn't always easy. I had moments of doubt, moments where the old programming kicked in, and I wondered if I was making a mistake. But Daniel was patient, and I was committed to honesty, and slowly I built a life that felt real. Maybe you know this feeling too. Maybe you've spent years trying to fit into a shape that wasn't yours, trying to be what everyone expected, trying to ignore the voice inside that kept saying something was wrong. Maybe you've had a moment like I had, where everything fell apart and came together at the same time, where you finally chose truth over comfort. Or maybe you're still in the middle of it, still trying to figure out who you are underneath all the layers of expectation and fear. If this story touched you, if you saw yourself in any part of it, leave a like. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine, stories about the courage it takes to be honest, about the price and the reward of authenticity. And if you want, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Or just write, "My truth set me free." Because here's what I learned that night at the Plaza Hotel. Standing in that ballroom with my whole life crumbling around me. The truth will cost you something. It will cost you relationships, jobs, the comfortable lies you've been telling yourself. But it will also give you something infinitely more valuable. It will give you yourself. It will give you the possibility of real love, real connection, real life. And that, I've learned, is worth everything. You're not alone. Whatever you're going through, whatever truth you're struggling to face, you're not alone. And the courage to speak up, to be yourself, to refuse to stay silent in the face of hatred or your own denial, that courage is already inside you. You just have to choose to use it. I did, and it changed everything. It can change everything for you too.